countries, and especially the Sephardic community there, the Sephardic Rabbinate, respectively. So tonight I wanted to speak about Singapore. I thought that's an opportune time. We've spoken about various different countries already over here, but we're going to do a short historical class on the country of Singapore, of the Jewish community in of itself, respectively. I thought it's an opportune time now. We know, I think it dates back to the 19th century, so quite a recent era, we can say in itself. The Jewish people over there, I think at this present point in time, are currently a significant minority population in the country. Now, Singaporean Jews, or the Jewish people of Singapore, are citizens who are Jewish. There could be some that might identify as ethnically Jewish, or cultural Jewish, or religious Jewish in of itself. Now, Singapore is the only remaining country, I believe, reports over in Southeast Asia to have indigenous Jews, respectively. That's what's actually chronicled over. Let's look a bit about the history in of itself. Now, I think the first wave of Jewish immigrants to Singapore were of Baghdadi origin of Iraq, respectively. I think the migration of Baghdadi trade diaspora occurred especially during the 18th and 19th century, and was at a peak at around 1817 due to the rule of the Ottoman governor. His name was Dawood Pasha of Baghdad, who persecuted Jewish people, I think, at that point in time during his 15-year rule. Unfortunately, we saw anti-Semitism all throughout Jewish history. Now, the first Jews to live in Singapore were the Baghdadi traders, who were trading between then the British ports of Calcutta and Singapore. These settlers spoke Arabic, and after arriving in Singapore, adopted the Malay language, then the main language used in Singapore at that point in time. Now, approximately 180 descendants of these Jews still exist, which I think the current Rabbi of Singapore, Rabbi Mordechai Abargel, described as the only remaining indigenous Jews of Asia. That's what's reported over. Chronicled over here. I think it's actually quoted from the Straits Times news publication, I think in 24th of September 2024. Now, I think come what the year 1841, three Jewish people, Joseph Dwight Cohen, Nassim Joseph Ezra, and Ezra Ezekiel, were given a land lease to build a synagogue in a small shop, House of Boat Quay, I think this was. The synagogue was, let's say, inspiration of the name of the Sephardi street, respectively. Now, Synagogue Street was in the first Jewish quarter in Singapore, bordered by another street called the Wilkie Road, I think Mount Sophia Road, Bras Basah Road, and Middle Road, which, let's say, the Jewish called the Mahala, meaning place in Arabic, respectively. That's what it meant. Now, it was a gathering place, I think, for the Jewish community in Singapore. The local Jewish community also had a specific custom, a minhag, that allowed for traveling to synagogue on Shabbat via rickshaw, something called a rickshaw over here. That's the first I've heard about it. I think it's originally denoted a pulled rickshaw. It's a 2 or 3 wheeled cart, generally pulled by one person carrying one passenger. This is what's reported over. I think actually the source for this actually is chronicled over. I think there's an article that the Jewish community of Singapore, the Museum of the Jewish People of Beit Hat Fut Sot. I think that's what it's actually titled as, this article itself. Very interesting and over. So yeah, that's very, I'm not too sure when that was actually published in of itself, respectively, but that's what's chronicled over. Now, I think there was a man with the name Manasseh Meyer, very famous person, definitely within regards to Singapore Jewry and world Jewry, especially in his era. We're going to speak about him in a minute. He found the synagogue in Synagogue Street in a deplorable, let's just say at that point in time, it was a more deplorable state, and set about planning a new one for the Jewish community. Now, Jewish community leaders at that point in time sold off the old synagogue and to the government, and bought new land for a new synagogue along an area called Waterloo Street. Then it was actually called the Church Street, because of the presence of the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul. I think that happened to have been nearby. Now, the Jewish community soon began moving into the surrounding areas, I think called the Dobe Gort, Waterloo Street, Prinsep Street, Silesia Street, and the Wilkie Road, let's say. Now, I think actually in modern days, several Jewish buildings still exist in that area. Now, construction, there was the famous Magen Avot Synagogue, which we'll speak about in a few minutes, began soon after the community was given the land, and was then completed towards the end of the 19th century in 1878. I think a well was sunk for use as a mikveh, a ritual bath. That's what we've spoken about before. And the consecration service, I think, would be held on the 4th of April, 1878. We're talking about 147 years ago from time recording, and it was conducted by either Lucanus or the first, J. Haim, or both men. And I think come 1924, about 101 years ago, extensions were made to the building. Now, over the years, as obviously there was Jewish immigration to Singapore would increase, the Magen Avot synagogue began to become overcrowded during services because I think there was differences, especially in the Ashkenazic and Sephardic communities, the services of how it should be conducted. I think Sir Menachem Meyer decided to build a new synagogue called the Chesed El Synagogue, which is completed in the year 1905, which I'll also try and speak about in a minute. By 1931, the population grew to 832. And I think there was a census record that 832 Jews and larger number of Arab residents were the largest house property owners in the city. That's what's reported over. Now, the Japanese occupation would actually take place in the year 1942. It was the same year the Japanese occupation of Singapore started. The Jewish population grew already to 1,500. And I think during that point in time, many Jewish settlers were taken to the Paukum campus, which was located, let's say, on the Changai prison and Sima Road. In the camp, the Jewish settlers were allowed to keep a kosher kitchen. Now, post-war, I think after the Second World War ended, there was, let's say, some sort of an exodus of Jewish community to Israel and Western countries such as Australia, United Kingdom, and United States. As a result, the community dropped to approximately only 450 come 1968 and was about 180 I think some point in the 1960s. Recent histories, I think from the late 1980s, Jewish communities started growing, obviously because of economic development, and there was more Ashkenazic immigration rates to Singapore. Especially as of 2015, the community have grown to as many as 10,456, which is absolutely staggering. Now, I think approximately 180 descendants of the first wave of Jews, who are mostly Orthodox, began arriving almost 200 years ago, and they still exist. I think the Rabbi of Singapore, the current one, Rabbi Mordechai Abaragel, described as the only remaining indigenous Jews of Southeast Asia. Now, some famous people, let's speak about that before we speak about the synagogue. Someone named David Marshall, I believe he was well known. He lived between 1908 to 1995. He was the first chief minister of Singapore in 1955, served 14 months, while I think he was being the leader of the Labour Front. He also led the first talks of the Merdeka talks to London in hopes of regaining independence from British, but resigned, I think, after he didn't necessarily succeed in of itself. Now, following his resignation, I think in 1957, he would found the Workers' Party of Singapore, which is currently Singapore's second largest political party, interesting enough. I think later on he would serve as Singapore's ambassador to France, Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal. He passed away of lung cancer, reported over in 1995. Now, a famous man of the name Sir Menachem Meyer. He lived between 1843 to 1930. He was definitely famous. He was a British businessman and a philanthropist, a benefactor to the Jewish community in Singapore. He was the Jewish community's most generous benefactor, responsible for setting up two synagogues, the Magen Avot synagogue, which we'll speak about, and the Chesed El synagogue. Now, Chesed El was built for the use of his family and others, I think. He would buy a large piece of land along with other people, I think in the Moulmein Road, and for the Jewish cemetery, I think at that point in time. And other plots were actually purchased itself. I think come on 1928, he donated as much as $150,000 to the University of Malaya in Singapore to build, I think, a science building, which obviously had become a Singaporean national monument. I think Britain's King George V knighted him in 1929, and he donated $20,000 to the British military efforts in the World War I. Mayor Road in Singapore is actually named after him. So there was another famous person named Frank Benjamin. He was a merchant who founded a retailing company, F.J. Benjamin, in 1959. He opened Singapore's first single brand store, Lanvin, in the Grand Hyatt Hotel, reported over. Now, another famous person was someone named Jacob Ballas. I think he lived between 1921 to 2000. He was a stockbroker, a philanthropist. He actually was born in Iraq. He was a chairman of the Malayan Stock Exchange, I think for several years in the 1960s, and would have various other important roles, as I say before, working, I think, for charities and his philanthropy in Singapore is marked by the Jacob Ballas Center, apparently. Another famous person of the name Joseph Grimberg. He lived between 1933 to 2017, a prominent lawyer and former Supreme Court judge. Now, another famous person is someone named Harry Elias, who lived between 1937 to 2022. He was a founder of the Law from Harry Elias Partnership, LLP, one of Singapore's top lawyers. I think in 1985 himself, he set up the criminal legal aid scheme in which lawyers defend for free those poor and accused of non-capital crimes. As of, I think, 2015, let's just say the scheme had grown to serve up 6,000 people annually. Very interesting enough. The Jewish community institutions. Now, let's speak about this a little bit. The Magen Avot Synagogue. Obviously, its location on Waterloo Street. Constructed in 1878, obviously the oldest synagogue in Southeast Asia. I think it's open throughout the year and is a primary synagogue of the Jewish community in Singapore. Obviously, events, celebrations, especially festivals like Yom Kippur on that point in time. I think come 27th of February 1998, the synagogue was gazetted as a national monument of Singapore. Let's speak a bit about it also. I think it's very, very important. We just explore a bit about the synagogue. As I said before, it's oldest and largest Jewish synagogue in Southeast Asia, and I think was designated, obviously, as we said before, a national monument. Currently, it's under the leadership of Rabbi Mordechai Abergel. But I think most Jewish people that came to Singapore, especially in 1831, was mostly Sephardic and Edut Mizrach Jews, especially Iraq and Iran. They came to trade over there. In 1870, one of the synagogue's new trustees, Joseph Joshua, negotiated by a plot of land owned by the Raffles Institution at Bassa, I think for $4,000 at that stage in time. Obviously, the synagogue will have a turbulent time during the Japanese occupation, I believe, and that was gazetted. Yeah, so I think in contemporary era, I think as of 2007, a 7-story building called the Jacob Ballas Center was added to the compound next to Avram Magen Avot Synagogue, respectively. And more can be said. The Jews, there's obviously a Jews of Singapore Museum. I think that was opened in 2021. The architecture, I think itself, was original single-story building. Could, let's say, only accommodate men originally, but I think it would change more into U-shaped second-story balcony. Later on for women would actually be able to come over there and so on and so forth. So that's interesting within regards to that which we have to point out. So we explored a tiny bit within regards to the synagogue of the Magen Avot, which is very important. Let's look a bit more within regards to, let's just say, another synagogue over there was called the Chesed El Synagogue, another famous synagogue, which we should not ignore. I think it was obviously located on Oxley Rise in River Valley, I think in the central area of Singapore, and constructed, I think, in 1905, and come 1998, designated once again as a national monument of Singapore. I think it was, yes, that's interesting. A Jewish community center was built on synagogue grounds. I think a communal sukkah used also, which is also very interesting. I think it's actually a Sephardi synagogue also, we should point out, but we can say more things within regards to it. I think it's being used on many various different importances, especially nowadays, which we also have to point out. So very interesting. It actually relates over about different entrances over there to the place, and I think obviously this was as the community grew, it was essential to have this place over here, which is very, very important. Okay, it's got beautiful architecture and characteristics to it also, so we have to point that out. Okay. So just to explore a bit more, so we've spoken about the Magen Avot Synagogue. Chesed El, the United Hebrew Congregation, I think was confirmed in 1993. Only, obviously, we don't necessarily celebrate it because I think it's for the only Reformed Jewish community. We're an Orthodox channel here, so we're not going to speak more about that. Now, there's a Ser Menasseh Meir International School, a very famous school over here, which I think was formed, is the only Jewish international school for students aged 18 months to 16 years, admitting students of all nationalities and faiths. Students choose to follow the Jewish education in Hebrew or world religious in English. I think it was in 1996, Mrs. Simcha Rebbergel, or Rebbenit, as a nursery for young children. It was founded. It was named the Ganenu Learning Center over there, but later was renamed, I think, in 2008, while on 170 student capacity campus in Bivedera Close of Tanglin Road. I think in 2016, the school's new SGD $40 million campus in Jayan Ula Samboak opened. I think very interesting enough. So we have to point that also. So that's very interesting. So much more can be chronicled within regards to the Jewish community of Singapore. That is definitely another important one. Let's say a few words within regards to the famous Menashe Meir. I think it's very, very important to speak about him because obviously we have mentioned the synagogue he had and various other importances. Let's just say that roles he's going to take. He lived between 1843 to 1930. He was obviously a leader over there. He was born in Baghdad. I think he was educated in Calcutta. He would come in 1861, only age 15, to Singapore. Various different institutions he would be in. I think he would return to Calcutta at one stage in time to work with his uncle in business, and was learning literary Hebrew and Arabic, apparently reported over, and very, very famous. Became Commot 21. I think he would go to Burma, and then he would travel to various areas: Egypt, Palestine, Iraq, Europe, India, China, and Japan. Remember, he was born, I think, actually in Baghdad, in Iraq. He would return, I think, to Singapore in 1873, found import-export business, and opium trade, I think, would be involved with. And he was linked, let's say, to flourishing Baghdad Jewish community of Calcutta and Singapore. I think someone named Raphael Sassoon was a fellow Jewish pioneer born in Aleppo, was his partner in the firm which he was working in, and trustee of the Magen Avot synagogue, which he would be very much, obviously, is now part of very much. Much more can be said about him. Obviously, he was a British citizen, and he displayed loyalty to the British Empire to be a public citizen. But he was also a municipal commissioner from 1893 to 1900, and a member of the currency board. He also contributed generously from his fortune towards war effort from 1915 to 1919. I think his greatest work, let's just explore that, of Sir Menashe Meir, was within the Jewish community, where he was the Baghdadi Jews of Singapore most generous benefactor, we have to point out, especially Magen Avot and Chesed El. And I think together he would partner up with 3 other wealthy Jews over there and would buy a large piece of land in an area called the Mulmain Road, I think $5,000 plus, $5,400 plus, for the Jewish cemetery over there. And really interesting, that is, so he was in a huge amount there. Menashe Meir himself was, within regards to Judaism and Zionism, he obviously established a synagogue and was born in Baghdad. He was part of a knit transitional trade network of Baghdadi Jews, I think, respectively. But he had strong ties, obviously, to the Middle East all throughout his life. So we have to point that over here. Now, I think he remained close to Jewish religion establishment in Baghdad all throughout. Obviously, he would underwrite the publication of one of the books of the Rabbi Yosef Ben Chaim, the famous Ben Shai, so it was close to the Ben Shai. And he actually looked at the Ben Shai as a spiritual mentor. He was inspired by Rabbi Chaim's focus on supporting the growing Jewish community in Palestine and became a committed Zionist. I think he, during his lifetime, the proto-Zionist of the Baghdad religious establishment, and the Ben Shai was transferred into active support for the Zionist movement by Theodor Herzl, interesting enough. Now, I think come 1900, he traveled to Jerusalem with his daughters to inculcate them with a love of Zion, let's just say. In 1922, Menashe Meir became the founding president of the Singapore Zionist organization, and the work was known as a beehive of Zionistic activity in Asia. 1922, he hosted Albert Einstein also, and especially through the travelings through the Baghdadi Jewish communities of Asia, let's just say, seeking financial support for the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And more can be said within regards to that. He was to be one of Hebrew University's major donors. Very interesting, Mr. Manasseh was. He also supported a school and a synagogue for Baghdadi Jews in Palestine. A rabbi from Palestine would officiate to mark his funeral at the Chesed El Synagogue. Now, he's survived by 3 sons. There were twins, Isaac and Jacob and Reuben, and 4 daughters, Hannah, Rama, Rachel, and Mosele. After he passed away, It's interesting. Mrs. Meir, or Rebbetzin Meir, the daughter of Mosel Nissim, sponsored the creation of a school called Kfar Vitkin in the Mandatory Palestine. Now, Manasseh Meir's legacy can still be felt in Singapore. For example, the two synagogues contribute to providing the cornerstone of a thriving community. And I think the Jewish network institutions bearing the name still function. I think Kamot, Sir Manasseh Meir, I think International School was opened, I think, around 2008. Actually was renamed from something else. Again, a new learning center, like we said before. It's a Jewish day school that caters to children from 18 months to the 7th grade, respectively. Also, there's Manasseh Meir Building, which was constructed by Meir in the 1920s, I believe. Currently, part of the National University of Singapore's the Bukit Timah campus, which has to be pointed out. The building was gazetted as National Monument, I think, in 2009, 11th of November, to be precise over there. So more can be said. Very, very special community over here. We've spoken about the school of Sir Menashe, respectively, about a bit of the history of the Jewish community over there, and much more can be said within regards to that, which recommend everyone to look at. They've even got their own kosher guide, I believe. There's a Chabad over there, and much more is reported over. I think from the Commonwealth Jewish Council also will chronicle over information within regards to this itself, the Jewish community of Singapore. Just adding, obviously, the Baghdadi Jews arrived, I think, in 1800s. The most well-known of the families over there was the Sassoon family, reported over. I think 1840, the community was large enough to need a synagogue, and was absolutely outgrown. And in 1878, the Magen Avot synagogue was inaugurated. 1905, the second synagogue, the Chesed El, was built with a community centre by Manasseh Meir, as we've mentioned about him before, the greatness he did. And he employed minyan men to ensure there was a regular minyan. I think even during the Second World War, many of the 5,000 Jewish residents of Singapore were interned under Japanese occupation. They were forced to wear armbands and medallions with the word Jew written on them. Men were forced into labour, I think, at that point in time. It's just going on a side note. I think come with the 1960s, a trade between Singapore and Israel increased, obviously bringing more wealth to the area. In 1968, an official trade agreement was signed between two countries. So you have to speak about it. I think this article was connected to the Geniza project, if I'm not mistaken. Very important project, which I recommend everyone to look into. So that is also very, very interesting. It was we've spoken about various other countries, especially I think quite recently we did a video on Morocco and somewhere else, I think in Europe. We did on Malta, and we did of another place also. So that is very interesting. So please, everyone, watch the videos that we're doing. We're speaking today about Singapore, and there's actually a website of the Chesed El Synagogue, which you can find on the internet, which I very much recommend. A very, very professional one. And I think they do actually state various different importances within regards to it. If you search on the chesedel.org website, which I recommend, very beautifully designed website from the time of recording, and how important it is to learn more. Also, the Chesed El Synagogue does commemorate Manasseh Meir. There's famous pictures actually of them over here, which I recommend everyone to look into. So he was very, very great. The Singapore Jewish community, I think, currently is headed by Rabbi Abergel, which we also have to point out. And I think the current Commonwealth Jewish Council, comprised of Ben Benjamin, Nash Benjamin, and Victor Sassoon, I think it's reported over. There's actually a website out there called SingaporeJews.com, which I recommend everyone to actually read about the community itself, talking about how it was established and how it's included various different people. Dr. Yair Cohen is obviously one of the famous people also we didn't mention on today's video, which I would recommend. It's reported over that Singapore serves as financial hub in Asia and also Jewish hub itself. And very interesting. Just to recap, 1878 saw the inauguration of Magen Avot Synagogue, 1904 saw Chesed El Synagogue, respectively. And there's mikvah, there's men's mikvah, there's a kosher restaurant, I think called Awafi Kosher Restaurant in modern day. and the Sunday Hebrew School program, the Abdallah Shuka Home for the Aged, and the Chevra Kadisha, respectively. So much is chronicled over there within regards to the history of Singapore, which I recommend everyone to speak about. We know that Rabbi Ravni happens to be an operational manager of the JBC and youth leader. And I think they would join the committee in Israel in 2006. He was heading a yeshiva program, outreach, I think, various different initiatives. Now, someone else important is obviously more rabbis that we spoke about. I think yesterday there's some Rob. That's very, very interesting enough. So there's also Ganenu, which is part of Singapore Jewish community. They offer a Sunday school also of a Jewish education, Torah, Hebrew language, history, culture for children and kindergarten. And they state at the end, this is Jewish Learning Academy website of Singapore, the teachers engage the students in the learning process with fun activities and assess each child's individual success rate. So they're really believing and imbuing faith in themselves to the people over there. This person they gave over that message that we're stating over there. So that's very, very interesting. Singapore Rabbanim, it's currently a Chabad rabbi that would actually head, let's just say, Singapore in of itself, respectively. So obviously it was a growing community in its day, and obviously originally in the 1870s it was based in Waterloo, and very interesting. So it's interesting. I personally wouldn't like to leave Eretz Israel at any stage in time, but this definitely does sound like there is a special Jewish community there, or definitely within recent modern era itself, and architecture and history is very, very important. I think the community in Singapore, the World Jewish Congress, let's say, also acknowledges the greatness of the community itself, respectively. And much more can be said. Obviously, Manasseh Meir was a famous person at that point in time. I think the president of the WJC currently is Victor Sassoon, who might have been related or connected at that point in time to a place we just visited before. So that's very, very interesting. Our friends, we're a community here. We're learning about the various different importances in the Sephardi community all over the land of Israel, which is very, very interesting. And I think very, very important. Not many people are stating this over in English, these videos, but definitely there's a vacuum over here to do it. We're exploring about the great rabbis that might have been from Ottoman time period and so on and so forth, also Asian, North African, respectively, and trying to see what's the science behind the greatness and the brilliance of some of them. So very, very interesting. Now, friends, we're a community. We're learning about the great rabbis of this year. We're trying to tap into previous year within regards to the greatness of the people, and try and lift everyone up, be positive, let's say, form of life for Am Yisrael, and so on and so forth. Now, friends, please, everyone, subscribe to the channel. We're nearing 7,500 subscribers, which is absolutely phenomenal. If you feel anyone is interested in watching any of these videos, please share these videos also to other people. Also, it's not just we're recording videos and historic videos of famous countries, obviously, like we're doing today. We are now looking at, unfortunately, on various different fronts, issues that is going on. So that is very interesting. We do also on this series, we speak about current events, issues that we were just speaking about, and we travel around Israel. We do tours all over Israel, which I think is another very, very important project that we have embarked on at the moment, and seeing once again reaping huge benefits. You can't translate, this in of itself. So very, very interesting. So I think on that note, we are going to call it a day. Please don't hesitate to contact any Shailot, anything. I can point you all in the right way. And there's Russian blessings all over the entire world, we hope, and just good things. And let's watch your space, friends, over here as we make fantastic progress all throughout. So on that note, wishing you well. Thanks for watching and take care.